Okay, here we have the screencast for the reading by WEB Dubois of Our Spiritual Strivings. And the directions here, we want to make sure that we have some understanding of double consciousness, any connection to your life, and try to figure out what this author is trying to suggest as a solution to the race problem in America. So we begin with this term, double consciousness. And here he writes, there's a sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, measuring one's soul by the tape of the world. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings. So what I want you to do is just think about you. Think about who you are. Think about a time in your life where maybe, you were, experiencing something similar. For example, I am a Puerto Rican American, or am I an American Puerto Rican? Depending on how I, place the Puerto Rican can determine where I hold my allegiance to. It's just something to think about. So think about whatever you are, and I'll give you a couple of scenarios that'll help reinforce this understanding of double consciousness. So the reading starts out in the beginning where he comes to this realization that he is different, and he talks about a card exchange. So imagine, he's in elementary school and he is trying to, give his exchange, as he mentions here. The exchange was married to one girl. A newcomer refused my card, and she gives him a glance. So at that point, he says it dawned on him at that particular point that he was different from the others. He also brings in this particular passage where he says that people approach him in a half hesitant way. They ask him questions, or they say things like, I know an excellent colored man, or I fought at Mechanicsville, or do not these southern outrages make your blood boil? So he's referencing in this dialogue things that have been communicated to him. So he says, I know an excellent colored man, or I fought at Mechanicsville. Like, this is a reference to the Civil War, a battle. So, hey, I fought at Mechanicsville. So imagine in a scenario if the individual is white and he's saying this to someone black. Keep in mind, I'll be using various terms. I understand that race is a social construct, and so I could use the term Caucasian. However, if you're not from the Caucasus area, that could be problematic. So I may play around with some of the labels here, just to kind of highlight, the use of labels and how they create a problem for society. So let's kind of move on. I'll give you a scenario. So here I've this image of a 1920s store, and you see the aisles. So in this scenario, I want you to think about double consciousness and think about you walking through a grocery store, or in this case, this department store, and this is your path. And this little explosion represents something. So think about, you know, yourself right now. Maybe you're Jewish, maybe you're African American, Asian American, maybe you're homosexual, whatever it is that you are. Just think about that for a sec. You're walking down the aisle, and somebody says to you, I like chitlins with my eggs, or I like the taste of curry in my eggs, or Goya products are my favorite type of bean for rice. Oh, wine and cheese? That is my favorite type of food. I always use soy sauce in my food. So think about these phrases here. Think about the groups of people that maybe they are intended to possibly make feel comfortable. However, in the process of trying to make somebody feel comfortable, you probably have put them in a position where now maybe you have offended them, or maybe they feel that they are different. Well, that is exactly what he is talking about here. That is precisely what is happening to him here. These things are being communicated to him, and as a result of that, he is saying that he feels that he has this two-ness, that there is this situation that started with this girl exchange, that he knows he is different in America or within society. What about this scenario? These little explosions are called microaggressions. Are they still with us today? And how could this guy be writing in the 1900s about something that still haunts us today? Go back to the scenario. You're walking through the aisle and somebody says, Dr. Martin Luther King did so much for your people. Gandhi is my favorite historic figure. Harvey Milk did so much for gay rights, and he is my favorite, well, after Gandhi. I do not blame all Chinese for the actions of Mao. I love the Chinese people. Cesar Chavez was a great American. Think about these particular comments and how they make the individual on the receiving end feel. We always celebrate and exchange gifts for Kwanzaa. I love the lights of Diwali. Tet is my favorite Chinese holiday. Oh, is that Vietnamese? I always go to New York during the Stonewall Riot remembrance. Yes, my family celebrates Three Kings Day, just like you Puerto Ricans do. So again, you want to think about these questions, these comments, and things that are being said, and how in the process of trying to make people feel comfortable, you probably have had the opposite reaction. Now, I know what you're thinking. Maybe we left one particular group out. Okay. What about if somebody says not all whites are racist? Is that a belief? Do people believe that? Caucasians are my favorite people. Again, I've already addressed it. If you're not from the Caucasus area, I don't know about the use of this term. What I'm trying to point out here, using this vicious cycle diagram, is that all of these groups, they have some things in common. You could be in a situation where people, as a result of these microaggressions and maybe the big institutions in society, people start to develop a belief in inferiority. And maybe that's a result of these exchanges. Maybe it's a result of, things that are, taking place in their lives. The question here is, you know, if you're white, are you allowed to feel a certain way? Are these examples here similar to this? Like if I was a student in class and somebody said all whites are racist, how many times is somebody really going to challenge somebody on that? It could be offensive, and the end result could be a feeling that Dubois is still talking about. So I'm just bringing that particular point up for that one. How do the comments make you feel? Do such comments and questions make you feel like an American? And that is precisely double consciousness, that there are these two Americas. And with these two Americas, these little arrows are just representing those different Americas that possibly exist. The outcome of being different. Now, this is an interesting point. He looks at these experiences and he says that some people are going to respond. Everybody's an individual. Some people, and he uses the example here with other black boys, the strife was not so fiercely sunny. So here he's talking about, other black boys in his situation, and, he has taken the approach where he is just going to try to beat them. And he says that in the reading. Says that others might fall into a silent hatred of the pale world. So you can respond in anger. You can accept the situation. But for this particular author, he's saying that he wants to beat these individuals in every particular opportunity and chance that he has. In other words, to prove his worth to society. What's interesting about his writing is he's writing that in the early 1900s. And if you look at King's letter from a Birmingham jail, he's addressing the same situation. That some Negroes have adjusted to segregation, some are profiting, and some have a bitterness and hatred towards white America. You can look at this example and you can put any group in this particular model. You can take gay rights. Some homosexuals historically will look at the situation and have learned helpless. There's nothing we can do. It's just the way things are. We have to learn to live with it. And some individuals might develop a bitterness and hatred. You can take that for any group. Go back to my example with Caucasian and white. Think about how many times you have heard, somebody say all whites are racist, and that comment goes unchecked. Well, that might create a situation where people are just going to develop a bitterness and hatred. I'm always told that, whites are racist, that whites are evil, and whites have done X, Y, Z. And as a result of that, some individuals might develop a bitterness and hatred. I have to just, go to the right, preserve what I have, and I'm not going to, trust, any other particular group. So what I'm trying to identify here is just a common feeling. At the end of the day, we are dealing with a lot of similarities. And Dubois is addressing something that is specific for being African American in the early 1900s. But what he writes is fascinating because it has so many applications to present day America. He then addresses the situation whether or not blacks should be content. And he writes about the violence, segregation. He talks about lynching. And keep in mind that for the early 1900s, slavery ended about 50 years prior. So there are probably people that have been slaves in their lives and they're still alive. So he's looking at a solution for the race problem in America, and he writes that physical freedom, political power, training of brains, and training of hands, none of these things together alone are going to solve our problem. For example, we've obtained physical freedom, slavery is over. Political power during Reconstruction, you see, former slaves, Africans in positions of power and political power. Did it end segregation? No. The training of brains, education, the training of hands, the ability to produce a wage. If we have any one of these, that might not be good enough. And in some cases, we tried physical freedom. It didn't change our circumstances. We have political power, yet we still have segregation. So what's the solution? His argument is one of those things is incomplete. You probably need all four. And to understand where he's coming from, you have to think about his approach in comparison to Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington, born in 1856, which means this individual was born into slavery. He was not. Maybe that has a role in their approach to the race problem in America. Washington, somebody was saying, we need to accept, what's given to us. You can't expect slavery and segregation to end and people's in society changes, like that. It just doesn't happen that way. Time. We need time. Whereas Dubois is talking about self-reliance. You can't accept what they're going to give us because they will give us nothing. If they're going to give us jobs in menial tasks, that's never going to help us overcome economic problems that are, going to plague us after slavery. So we need to do things on our own, and we can't just accept. We need to use all of these to achieve greatness. And I can't help but think that Washington and Dubois represented the Malcolm and Martin of the civil rights movement, because all four of these individuals have different approaches. It would have been nice to have a conversation. I'd like to be a fly on the wall with these four individuals talking about the race problem in America in 2020. Anyway, that's it. Think about these questions.